Okay, we're actually going to write some JavaScript now, and I'm going to do this in Dreamweaver. You can download a trial version of Dreamweaver for free from adobe.com. If you want to use that for the rest of the class, you're more than welcome to use that. It allows us to spend a little bit less time focusing on our HTML and allows us to focus on writing our script. It also allows us to use some of the tools built in. Dreamweaver has some coding hints, so it'll give me some properties and values that help me make sure that I'm using the right thing and not making typos. But it's also going to give me line numbers for my code, which can be helpful when debugging. I'll show you how to find errors later on in the browser, and the browser generally will reference a line number, and because you're not going to have line numbers in something like Notepad, it makes it a little easier. That's not to say that you can't continue using Notepad if you're comfortable with Notepad. You've got your groove down and you know exactly what you're doing using Notepad. Then continue using it, and you'll have no problems with that either. So let's go ahead and get started. And I need to make some notes ahead of time that I will make errors as I'm writing this code, and so you have to bear with me a little bit. If I were to stop and re-record this every time I made a typo or something didn't work, then I'd never get these videos recorded. So these are going to be a little more a little less formal probably than some of the earlier ones. So I'm going to go ahead and start here in Dreamweaver. I'm going to tell it that I want to create a new HTML document. Normally when it comes up, it's going to come up in the design view here. This is the WYSIWYG editor. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with Dreamweaver, but generally speaking, you can type stuff. Welcome to the page, and then you can go in here and highlight what you want to do and maybe come down here and bold it or italicize it. And that works kind of like Word, and it writes the code for you behind the scenes. So let me show you that view. Up here on this secondary toolbar in Dreamweaver, you can go from the design view to the code view, and this is where we're going to see a lot of the stuff that we've studied up to this point in the semester. We see our HTML, our head, our title, our body tags. This is the data we just entered with emphasis. And so we're going to do most of our JavaScript work in here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that I just added. Well, I say I'm going to, but my mouse is not cooperating. All right, so let's go ahead and write some very simple JavaScript. I'm going to do a couple of JavaScript and talk you through them and do them in different places just to show you where the different places are you can put the JavaScript. So I'm going to first start out writing JavaScript in the head section of the document. Unless we tell it to delay, and that's a later lesson, when the browser comes in and reads this, it's going to read it in order. It'll read the doc type, it'll read the HTML tag, the head tag, and then eventually it'll get down to our script tag. And it's going to read those things in order, so because I haven't told it to delay the running of the script, when it hits that script tag, it's going to automatically run our script right when it goes to the head section, and it'll put it at the top of the display or the output in the browser window. So I'm opening up my script tag and adding my type. Notice as I start typing, Dreamweaver adds these helpful hints. I can either double click on the one that I want and have it fill it in for me, or if it comes up, I can also hit the tab key and it'll automatically add that for me. Be sure and close your script tag. If you do not close your script tag, your page will not work. We can be lazy and we can miss a lot of our closing tags in HTML, but this is one that you really need to pay attention to. If you don't close the script tag, the browser is going to assume all of the subsequent HTML is actually part of your script, and since it's not written correctly, it's going to throw all kinds of errors. So if you're ever working with JavaScript and you open your page up, you preview it in the browser, and it's completely blank, I want you to go and check to make sure you have closed the script tag, because a lot of times that's the main problem, is it hits that error and it can't display the rest of the page because it thinks it's part of the script tag. So with that said, let's go ahead and write a very simple document.write. And we're going to document.write, welcome to our page. So we have the document being the instance of the document object. We're going to use the method write, and we're going to tell it to write literally, because it's in double quotes, the words welcome to our page. And we're going to end our sentence with a semicolon. So I'm going to go up here in Dreamweaver to this secondary toolbar again. There's a little world icon which allows me to preview my page in various browsers. I'm just going to go ahead and preview this in Firefox real quick. It's going to ask me to save it. I say sure, save it. And when I do that, the browser should come up and we should see welcome to our page. So you're like, wow, that's not very exciting. But it'll get more exciting, but we have to go and we have to travel with baby steps first. So I'm going to close that down and go back to our code. And I want to talk to you about what document.write is actually doing here. Document.write is writing a temporary document that is then fed into the browser and interpreted. So what this allows us to do is we can incorporate our HTML into our literal statements and actually have the browser interpret them. So what I'm going to show you real quick is I can come in here and I can add H1 tags. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell the browser, literally print to the document, H1, welcome to our page, close H1. Then that document is interpreted by the browser and it will display it and execute the HTML tags. So let me go ahead and preview again to show you how that works. This kind of confuses folks because those double quotes, I've told you the whole time, it says literally print that, and so you're thinking, well, why does it interpret those H1 tags instead of print H1 in the browser screen? And it has to do with the fact that the document is created and then interpreted by the browser. And so that's what allows us to incorporate those, which is very useful. So I'm going to go down here into the body document and I'm going to type some gibberish. I'm going to start a P tag and just so we can get some content. And I'm going to put in another paragraph with more gibberish. And this is going to allow me to show you that you can actually put scripts down in the body section that will show up relative to where your content is too. And I have to correct those P tags. Dreamweaver tries to close tags for you automatically and I forget that. So when I'm typing, I end up closing it twice. So down here in the body of the section, I can add another script tag to tell tell the browser to go into program mode. And so everything it sees between this opening and closing script tag, it's actually going to execute and follow directions instead of literally printing it to the page. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do another very simple program that allows us to practice our concatenation. And we're going to go back to the example of the last modified property of the document. So we're going to have the browser document.write something to the page, but we're going to have it retrieve information from that property and concatenate it into a sentence. So we're going to tell it to document.write, because it's a method, we open up those parentheses, and we literally want it to say, because we're using our double quotes, literally print this on the screen, this page was last updated on. Now notice I hit the space bar before I hit my double quotes because I literally want the browser to put that space in there. If I didn't do that before the concatenation, then when it retrieves the last modified date, it would smush it right up next to the word on. And so that makes it literally add that space before I concatenate the rest of the sentence on. So I use the plus sign to concatenate, and then I tell it to go to the document.lastModified property, retrieve what's stored in there, and instead of printing the words document.lastModified, substitute it out and fill in the data that it retrieves. Now I can continue concatenating on. I can do another plus sign and I can literally have it print a period to end my sentence. Now don't forget to close the parentheses of your write method and add that semicolon to tell the browser that that's the end of the statement. So what it'll do now is the browser will come in, do its HTML, it'll run this program, it'll print out this content, it'll see that it's supposed to run another program, it'll go to the document, it'll write literally this page was last updated on, then it'll retrieve the information stored in that property, and then it'll add on that period. So let's take a look. I'm going to preview it in Firefox. Now when it asks me to save it this time, this is where it's going to stamp the document and add the last saved property. So I say yes, and right now it's storing 4:11 p.m. on 7/14/14. And so something similar to that should show up when we see our document. So this page was last modified on, there's that space, and then this is what was stored in the property of last modified. The great thing about this is you don't have to continually say my page was updated on and go down there and manually change the date. You write this program once, and every time you save the page from here on out, it'll automatically update that information for you to show that your page is current and that the information is still good. All right, let's go back to the page and let's just take a peek at some other things we can do. Up here in the page, we can do things like document.bg color. We can set that equal to literally yellow. That'll change the background color if we want to. We can do things like document.write. Let's see, the URL of this page is, and we can concatenate in document.location if we want to. And why don't we be very emphatic about that and put an exclamation point on the end of that statement. So this is just an example of some very simple programs that you can write. They're not really completely useful yet, but like I said before, we have to take baby steps before we can get where we need to be. So let's go ahead and preview this before we end the lesson to show you that our background color is now yellow. Here's the URL. Since it's stored locally here on my computer, it gives me that kind of information, and again, still displays our thing. So that's a very basic introduction to what we're going to be doing. In the next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the event handlers that will allow us to run our code when the user does something or when the page does something or some event happens.